In 978, a young boy of 16 was King of England. His name was Edward, but his reign was a short one of just 3 years. Unfortunately for young Ed, it was his death that he'd be best remembered for. And even more unfortunately, it was a woman he should have been able to trust that was responsible. After a day of hunting, Edward stopped off at Corfe Castle. He was dying for a drink, and soon he'd be dying because of that drink. When he arrived, Edward's stepmother, Elfrida, was waiting for him. She had been married to Edward's father, Edgar, who was known as the Peaceful for providing a period of calm for England in bonkers times when Viking attacks were far too frequent. As Edward arrived, some of Elfrida's servants approached him and offered the parched king a drink. Whilst the boy took a deep sip from his cup, he was murdered. There are different versions of the events, but it's more than probable that Elfrida was the mastermind of the assassination. The tragic king's body was dumped unceremoniously. Alongside Elfrida, the only beneficiary of these events was her son, Athelred, who became king. Unfortunately for everybody else in England at the time, he and his mother were about the only beneficiaries. Athelred's reign was a disaster. In fact, it was more than that. It was a calamity, a horror show, a tidal wave of misery. You get the idea. As a bloke, Athelred was likeable enough, but he didn't have the guts required to be king. The result of this was decades of turmoil, and the Vikings now did almost as they pleased. Athelred didn't know how to handle their attacks, and even worse, he was surrounded by people who were nearly as stupid as he was. One of the main tactics for repelling the Vikings was to pay them off with what is known as Danegeld. You and I would call this bribery today. Can you think of one reason why this is a super bad idea? Well, to put it simply, giving people money to go away actually has the opposite effect. It's a bit like giving a bully £5 to leave you alone, but actually they'll keep coming back for more bribes. And this is what happened with the Vikings. They saw that Athelred was too weak to deal with them, and so they kept coming back for more Danegeld. Time and again they were paid off. It was easy money for them. It's very easy to point the finger of blame only at Athelred, but those around him are nearly as responsible for the miseries of the reign. It's because of their dreadful advice that Athelred earned his nickname, the Unready. Translated to modern English, it literally means bad counsel. In 1002, Athelred made his worst decision yet. This one, though, had deadly consequences. It would appear that the buffoon was trying to appear strong to his increasingly despairing subjects, but all it resulted in was further evidence of his own ineptitude, the slaughter of innocent people, and albeit over a decade later, his eventual deposition. Athelred ordered all the Danes living in England to be slaughtered. This became known as the St. Brice's Day Massacre. If you felt sorry for Athelred before, now is probably a good time to stop. Perfectly innocent people were killed. One of these included the sister of the King of Denmark. Athelred had made a big mistake. The Danish king was named Svein Forkbeard. Cool name, eh? Unsurprisingly, he was infuriated at the news of the death of his sister, her husband, and many other Danes living in England, and so he launched a full-scale attack on Athelred's kingdom. If Athelred wasn't already aware that he had made a terrible error, than he certainly was now, and the next decade of his reign he paid the price as his realm became even more wretched and desperate. And finally, towards the end of 1013, he was finally kicked off the throne by Svein. Athelred and his sons went into exile in Normandy. Could this be the start of a long Danish dynasty ruling over England? Well, not yet. A few weeks later, in early February of 1014, after the excitement of conquering a foreign land, Svein did something very stupid indeed. He died. This was bad news for him, but even worse for the poor people of England. Athelred returned as king. Thankfully, he died only a couple of years later. He had ruled for nearly 38 years. In Anglo-Saxon England, this is a very long reign indeed. Even though the English crown was now up for grabs, and even with the threat of it falling again into Danish hands, Forkbeard's son Canute was now sniffing about. There wouldn't have been many people who mourned Athelred's passing. In fact, quite a large number of the population would have been quite happy that he was dead.